attendees. I am Anna from Katie Budget Books. I am one of the managers here and the events coordinator. For those of you that are new with us this evening, um, I am not a parenting expert, but I am a parent. I have three boys. I have a 17-year-old, which I still can't believe, a 3-year-old, and one that's just turned a year and a half. So those are my parenting credentials. Like, that's all I've got. I have survived this far, and so have my children. But we are so excited to have three parenting experts with us to talk about talking with our kids about various important subjects and ways to prepare yourselves and your children for that. So we have Dr. Abby Gewertz, Michelle Watson Canfield, PhD, and Shafia Zaloom. I'm going to give some more formal introductions for each of them as they start talking. But for those of you that are new to webinar, just so you know, we cannot see or hear you. There is a Q&A box. If you're on a laptop, it's along the bottom panel. If you are on various mobile devices, they are in different places, but it'll be in your normal menu. There's a Q&A box to ask questions as we go forward. But what we're going to do is each of our panelists are going to have about 15 minutes to kind of talk about what their books are about and what the message they hope that they're getting out into the world is. I will introduce each of them before their speaking portion, and then at the end we'll have time for Q&A from you guys. So just enter questions as you have them into the Q&A box, and we'll sort through that at the end during the Q&A session. So we are going to start with Dr. Abby Gewertz. She is a child psychologist and a leading expert on families under stress. She is professor in the University of Minnesota's College of Education and Human Development. It's ranked the world's third leading institution of its kind. Her career has been devoted to developing and testing award-winning skills-based parenting programs like the US military after deployment adaptive parenting tools, or ADAPT, that promote children's resilience. Dr. Gewertz has published more than 60 articles, book chapters, and a book on parenting and children's resilience. She is editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Psychology, a member of the executive committee of the International Union of Psychological Science, and a member of the board of directors of the Society for Prevention Research. She has consulted to national and international organizations, including the US Congress and UNICEF, on parenting. She has conducted research in the United States, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and has been invited to speak widely in the US and across the world on parenting in times of stress, which, like, aren't we in? She's a native of London, and she resides in Minnesota with her husband and 4 children. She was invited here today for her book, When the World Feels Like a Scary Place. It's about anxious parents talking to children about scary subjects. I learned so much from this book, and I'm so excited for her to introduce it to you.
Thank you, Anna. Like, it feels like that introduction was almost longer than the amount of time I have to talk here. And it's much more fun to talk about the book. But no, that was a kind introduction. And yes, I'm here to talk about When the World Feels Like a Scary Place. And is there anyone who does not feel like the world is a scary place today? I started thinking about the book back in 2016. Some people who I've been talking to over the last few months since the book has been released ask if I started writing the book when the pandemic hit. It's nice to be with 2 other authors today because everyone knows you can't possibly get a book out in 3 months. But 2016, I felt, was a tough year. And actually, 2015 was sort of as an example of what was going on in 2016, if we can remember that far back now, given how much is going on. 2015 was the year in which the number of migrants around the world, people fleeing one country for another, for the first time exceeded the number moving countries after World War II in 1945 per capita. So tremendous amounts of migration, and that was seen in arguments in our country in 2016 around immigration. So as you'll recall, 2016 was also an election year, and it was a pretty acrimonious election year and divisive election year at that. But 2016 was also a year where we started having lockdown drills in school as a matter of course. And when I went to visit with my editor for the first time, she said to me, I have a kindergartner, he just started school, and last night I got an email from the principal saying that the kindergartners are going to have their first lockdown drill in 2 days' time. What am I supposed to say to my child? We also have, over the last 10 years, experienced significant increases in severe weather events. So you're in Texas, so you know. I hope you escaped the most recent hurricane. It feels like these sort of climate change weather events are never ending. And then there's also these little things, that are never more than about a sort of a hand's reach away. The average child gets his first cell phone at the age of 10. And that means that the world starts coming in right around then. And so with all these things going on in the world, things that parents a generation ago did not have to deal with for the most part, I felt back in 2016, my youngest child was already just entering adolescence. So my kids were older, but I would talk to colleagues and friends and clients, and I felt I heard how difficult it was to be a parent, and specifically, how can I talk to my children about these really profound things? Social media bullying, horrific stories you hear of kids being urged to hurt themselves on social media, or violence, or the increase in hate crimes, or our divided democracy. How do we talk about that? And that's really what the book's about. So the first half of the book is really about how we parents deal with those big scary events that go on. Whether it's, you're driving to work and you hear really bad news on the radio, and then you hear, I'm in Tornado Alley, so there's a tornado warning. Or whether your child comes home from school and tells you about something that happened that makes you sort of horrified. And the first thing that we have to do is pay attention to what happens to us when scary world events, scary things happen. Because if we don't, sort of, as I say, and it's odd to say this now because most of us haven't been on a plane for months, but when you get on the plane and they tell you about what to do when there's an air pressure change, they say, put your own mask on before assisting others. And so that's really one of the first things that we talk about in the book, is how to put your own mask on, how to pay attention to your own emotions. And most importantly, how we think about reacting, which is when we're blown away by our emotions and we end up doing something, reacting, whether it's a 140 character tweet, so quick to do, or whether you yell at someone and then wish you could rewind, whatever it is. That's what I call reacting impulsively. Or we can respond intentionally, which means recognizing that we're sort of about to be blown over, or there's an effort so that our emotions are coming at us really quickly. And then taking the opportunity to intentionally to identify what's going on and take a pause, so that we then can choose how we respond, rather than dashing off that angry Facebook post, or yelling or picking up the phone and then regretting it. And then once we can do that, we can really do our children the favor of helping them to learn about emotions, scary events, and to figure out, most importantly, how they can get through, how they can work through these scary events, so that they can come out empowered, engaged in the world, and compassionate. And I think one of the most difficult challenges today, in the midst of a pandemic, children go outside and they literally see that the world is a scary, dangerous place, because apart from anything else, they see people with masks on, or they're hearing about social distancing. They can't just go up and hug their friends. And so one of the things I worry about is that we are facing a potential situation where already anxious kids become more anxious and learn that the only really safe place is in the home. And once we turn inwards, that's actually pretty un-American, the idea that we are only about us. So how can we, in a world that feels so, where things feel so scary, and we adults can easily feel so disempowered, how can we help our children get over it? And I can go into more details later, but that's basically the essence of the book, in several chapters about different kinds of big scary issues like technology and violence and social justice and divided society, and weather and climate.
I loved that so much of your book was about emotional awareness for the whole family and how important that is, so that you can kind of take care of your own emotional response to be more there for your children. I love that so much. And one of the things you talk about is starting a parenting journal, and you just kind of mention it in passing. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and why it's important?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you picked that up, because that is the one question I have never been asked in the 20 book events I've already done. Um, so essentially, what I'm so I have 4 kids, and I remember those days. And I empathize. You have 3 young kids. My kids are all much older now, but I remember those days where if everybody left the house with clothes and shoes on, if they ate 3 meals in a day and we got 3 hours sleep in a night, yay, what a victorious day that was. So parents don't really have time to think, right? You just focus on getting through the day. But then suddenly, whoop, the days are long, but the time is short. And you realize the time has gone, and you had things that you wanted to teach your children. And most of us, we do that implicitly and not explicitly. And so my goal in the book is to make the implicit explicit. And one of the ways to do that is by keeping a journal, by thinking, for example, about how things affect me. How do I react? What kind of an emotional processing person am I? What about my spouse? Do we kind of match? And I think even, arguably one of the most important things is, what are our values? If you tell parents, what are your values? If you ask parents, what are your values? They'll say, like, what are you talking about? Values? Like, I can barely survive. So I have an exercise at the beginning of the book, Anna, I'm not going to give it away, but it's a fun exercise to help parents think about what it is that they want to leave their children with. And that sort of, values are like this, goals are like this, but slowly, once we know where we are, where we came from, and what we want, I think that helps provide us with a roadmap for helping our children intentionally.
Okay. And then one of my other big questions that I want to make sure we get to is what are some ways to know whether or not to bring up a subject that you expect your child to be frightened of? Like when they're starting grade school and there's going to be fire drills, do you warn them about that ahead of time, knowing that it might scare them? Or do you wait until after they're scared about it? Like, how do you judge for your own children what the right thing to do in those situations are?
Right. It's a tough thing, right? But a lot of parents say, do I bring it up proactively? Do I wait for them to bring it up? Or my child is kind of quiet and private and doesn't say much. Or my child tells me everything, so should I just wait for them to tell me? So you brought up a really good example, fire drills. And I have a scenario in the book, not about fire drills, but about lockdown drills, right? So that, I think, is the kind of thing that it would be good for your child to know about from you ahead of time. And what I say to parents is, okay, if you think about the important things that go on in the world, would you rather your child learn about it from you, or from the kid sitting next to them on the bus, or maybe from their teacher? And I've never met a parent who didn't say, well, from me. So then the thing is, okay, what are you gonna say? How are you gonna say it? How are you going to pitch it at the level that's right, where you don't freak them out? And these are all things to think about, sort of informed by the kind of person you are. So, for example, I say, if you think this is going to really upset you, like if you feel incredibly strongly about, or something to do with school shootings has really, either it's personal or it's really disturbed you, then maybe someone else should take the lead. Maybe your co-parent should take the lead, or your spouse should take the lead in that conversation. So think about your child's age and stage, what they can understand. In general, you don't need to give, sort of, for younger children, you don't need to give details, particularly if they're sort of difficult, gory details. And mostly kids don't necessarily want to know those. They have more basic questions, which I think is really relevant to coronavirus, and maybe we can talk about that later. And those things are like, are you going to keep me safe, mommy, right? Or daddy? Am I going to be okay? Are people looking out for me? Those are the kinds of things that the kids want to know. And it's, I think one of the most difficult traps that we have as parents is we want to say everything's going to be fine. It's only a lockdown drill. No one's ever going to do that. Of course, we can't possibly promise that. But what we can say is, it's my job to keep you safe. And I'm doing a pretty good job of it. I think I work pretty hard at that. And you know what? Your teachers, that's their job too. And, the way in the book, the parents talk about the lockdown drill is very similar to a fire drill. Have you ever met anyone who had a fire in their house? No, me neither. Do you expect we're going to have a fire in our house? No, we're very careful. But just in case something happens, should we know what to do? Yes. So that's why we do it, that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we are going to move on to Dr. Michelle, and we will come back to you in the Q&A. Thank you, Dr. Abby. Okay, Dr. Michelle Watson Canfield is a national speaker, author, professional counselor of 25 years, and founder of the ABBA Project, a 9-month group forum for dads whose daughters are in their teens and 20s. She writes guest articles regularly for journals and magazines, online and print, as well as her own bi-monthly Dad-Daughter Friday blog, and has been interviewed on numerous radio programs and television programs. Her first book is titled Dad, Here's What I Really Need From You, A Guide for Connecting with Your Daughter's Heart, which is now available in her voice on Audible. And she has also written contributing chapters in Fathers Say and How to Disciple Men. Dr. Michelle hosts a weekly radio program in her hometown of Portland, Oregon, called The Dad Whisperer, which is also available on her website and in podcast form on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Dr. Michelle's second book, which she's here for tonight, is another field guide for dads of daughters titled Let's Talk: Conversation Starters for Dads and Daughters, and was released in August of this year. She also co-chairs the Father-Daughter Initiative at the National Center for Fathering with her husband, Dr. Ken Canfield. And together they are preparing to relaunch the Father-Daughter Summit in 2021 and start a Let's Talk curricula for dads and their daughters. So Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to tell us just a little bit about your book and its message.
Hi, Anna. I'm so glad to be here, especially with all of you tonight. So yes, I'll tell you a little bit about Let's Talk. So this was born out of, I believe, a legitimate need where dads that I have coached in group forums, as Anna just described, for the last decade, have often said, I don't know what to do when it comes to my aging daughter, especially when she hits adolescence. Operative word, hits adolescence. Oftentimes dads literally are smart enough to say, I'm making it worse. Here, mom, you go in, you're a girl. I'm going to let you take over this next decade, And I'm saying, dads, if you look at the research, it shows that when your daughter feels connected to you, every area of her life improves. Better grades in school, more likely to finish high school and attend college, healthier weight, less body dissatisfaction. She's more likely to hold steady employment, delay sexual activity, and you're going to love this one, more pro-social empathy. Boy, have we ever needed that more than now. Dad, it all comes down to you. So really, again, back to the book, it was born out of conversations with dads that I coach of daughters who have said, I oftentimes don't know what to say. I can tell I'm making it worse. So I'm going to back off and I say, Dad, what if I gave you a script? I'm a girl. Maybe if you ask the question like this, you'd open up a different conversation with her. And dads say, okay, I'm good with that. And I say, and then if your daughter hates the questions, just blame me. I'll be your fall guy. Dads go, okay, I'm good with that. And so really this book has 60 scripts. 54 are from dad to daughter. The last 6 are daughter to dad. Really, and my goal is to strengthen the dad-daughter relationship, help dads decode their daughters, because really at the end of the day, I believe our country will be healthier from the ground up when women are healthier. Do I hear an amen from everybody out there listening? And so we as women, when we have the investment of our dad listening to us, really my new husband, I just got married in June for the first time at the age of 60. And my husband, like I said, started, or Anna said, started the National Center for Fathering. And so he and I together share this passion for equipping fathers to step into their role as dads. And so really my goal with this book, Let's Talk, is to make it a practical field guide so that dads have words in front of them, the scripts there, to engage their daughters in conversation. Because here's the deal, I'm a girl. I know how girls think. I'm the oldest of 4 daughters. I've coached women, counseled women for over 25 years, actually more 40 if I count all of it, but clinically, professionally for 25. And I have found that when dads ask daughters questions, we figure things out by talking, right? We women sometimes don't know what we're thinking or feeling or needing. But when we get to talk it out, we have these aha moments of, I didn't actually know that's what I was thinking or needing or feeling. And so if dad can be the one to ask the questions and lead his daughter to figure herself out, she's going to be more empowered, more healthy, more clear, make better decisions. And so I've divided the book into 5 sections, and they all start with lead your daughter to, and then an L word. Because again, I want dads to be equipped to be leaders in their relationships with their girls. So the first one is lead her to laugh. Activities and questions that you can do as dad and daughter. Because dad, did you know that when you laugh with your daughter, her brain and your brain release chemicals that strengthen not only social bonding, but really those chemicals release oxytocin in her brain and in yours that are going to make her feel better and you feel better. I mean, how's that for win-win? So really a question, Dad, that I put in there that you could ask your daughter is, what item of my clothing would you love to see me get rid of? Hello, let's laugh together. That's a great starting point. Ask her, what do you imagine your wedding day to look like? Where do you want it to be? What would it look like? What about me makes you laugh? So there's some laugh kinds of questions you could ask. Second section is, Dad, lead your daughter to love. It's about loving herself so that she can give out that love to others. So it's about body image, self-esteem, those kinds of topics. Third section, lead her to look. So this is now getting into the weeds a little bit, into the heavier topics that I have found that dads sometimes avoid. This is looking at not only, maybe topics like sex and sexuality, but sexual harassment, right? Statistics show dads oftentimes avoid those topics. So imagine, Dad, if you have a script right in front of you, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can read it right there and write your daughter's responses right there. Because I say your daughter didn't come with a playbook, but I'm going to help you write one where she gets to know that what she says has value to you because you're listening to her. And then the next section is lead her to lament. Now, this might be that she's grieving losses of a pet or a best friend or a dream, but it also might be that she's lamenting wounds from you. So imagine what it would look like if you could hear her hurts now, that you may not remember something you said when she was 10 and she's now 25, and saying, Dad, I still remember when you said this or did this, and you can ask forgiveness now. You're going to have a healthier daughter for the rest of her life. And then the last section is lead her to listen. And again, I love how Dr. Abby said, 140 characters, we're limited so much to technology now. But really, if you can sit across from her and help her learn to ask you questions and listen to you, expand her capacity and her window of tolerance for maybe your distress or hurts you've had or your story about your family of origin, she's going to enhance her skill set in listening, which is going to help her in every area of her life with job interviewing, better as a student, better as a worker, better as a potential parent one day. So really that section is allowing your daughter to ask you questions by having words in front of her to build your dad-daughter bond. And one other thing I want to mention in the book is I have a dialed in dad checklist of 60 items where you as a dad can do some self-assessment, or if you're really brave, you can give it to your daughter and let her score you. But again, the whole point is to increase your bonding and your interactions with your daughter. So there you go. There it is in a nutshell.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. I'm so glad you're here. And when I started this book, I wasn't sure how much I was going to be able to relate to it because I am not a dad and we have no daughters in my household. So this is not even an issue for my husband. But it turns out I am a daughter, right? And I'm outside of the age range you're really talking about there. But I'm not gonna lie, like I do still have some things, some issues with my dad from when I was growing up that I love my parents. I grew up with wonderful parents. But my dad worked out of the country a lot particularly when I was in my adolescent years. And so he kind of rejoined the family when I was already in like a problematic later teen stage. And I think he did try to reconnect. He was back working in the country regularly. He was hardly ever having to leave town anymore. And I know that I pushed him away. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you is what advice you give to dads who are trying to reach out and reconnect with their daughters, but their daughters are acting like they don't want anything to do with that.
That is such a common issue. I love that you, Anna, would just have the courage to share a little bit of your own story. Is that you had a bond with your parents, but you're like, I wonder now, and let me just ask, like, when your daughter came back into your life and had missed a lot of your life, what would it have meant to you if he would have had scripts in front of him that would have asked you, like, what did I miss out on? How have I hurt you by not being there? What real emotions, I love that Dr. Abby talks about that importance of emotional intelligence and parents knowing their own emotional stuff that's going on. But what would that have meant to you if your dad would have asked you questions to draw you out? In contrast, or in addition to just, and I don't minimize it that way, but only doing things with you, what would that have meant to you?
That is a loaded question. But yeah, I see where you're going with that. Yeah, that persistence and trying to come from an emotional level instead of just re-entering family life and acting like everything is fine would have made a huge difference.
Right?
Not
Because
that things weren't fine, but the everything just picked right back up where it had left off.
Right, because he had missed a lot. And that's where I find a lot of dads, especially with divorce, where they are missing out on key chunks of what's happening in their daughter's life, maybe even on a weekly basis. And the more that you as a dad can kind of back up and not come as an authority, but really as maybe with curiosity, wanting to hear about her week, hear about her frustrations with you. I mean, I think about one of the best gifts a dad can give is to say, tell me how you're angry with me, and I promise I won't get angry back. And really, with dads again having scripts, I promise I'm not just trying to force my book into your hands, dads, but I want to see across our country relationships healed and strengthened. And it has to involve you hearing as a dad how you've maybe hurt your daughter without even knowing it. And so when you have a daughter who's reluctant and backing off and saying, I don't want to spend time with you, and putting walls up, obviously you have to pace with her, not force an agenda. And so every daughter, even if you have a son that's reluctant to connect with you, I have had dads say and moms say, I've used this book with my sons too. A lot of these questions apply. But the more you can come with curiosity and wondering about what's going on with him or with her, you're going to find she's going to move more towards you because you kind of backed off and said, I want to hear, you can come to me rather than I'm trying to tell you what you should feel or what you should think, or just listen to what I have to tell you. Come with openness to hear. And I guarantee your daughter, your son will move toward you.
Okay, and this was actually not one of my questions. It's from the Q&A box, but it is specific to you. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Would this
Sure.
book be appropriate for stepfathers and daughters?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say in many ways, I've had stepdads tell me they want this resource, sometimes more than dads that are in the home. In fact, I would say probably easily 75% of the emails I do receive across the country are from dads who are estranged from their daughters, whether it's through divorce or remarriage and they don't like the mom, the stepmom, or whatever. It's that kind of breach that really oftentimes creates a distance with dads that are stepdads or that are somehow in some kind of a blended family situation. So absolutely, I've even got questions in there that are just about being a stepdad, where you as a dad can ask your daughter, like, do you ever feel like you're competing or loyalty is an issue? If you bond more with me, your biological dad will feel less valued. And for her to be able to talk about feeling in the middle, dad, you give your daughter a gift. If you can hear what she has to say and not judge her, criticize her, even always correct her, but just hold that emotion or that space with her, you give her a gift to not have to feel like she maybe even has to manage your pain or your loss. In fact, just this week, a dad and daughter that I coach, she's a teenager, 16 years old. She actually heard her dad this week for the first time say, I'm realizing that I've hurt you by always saying, now, you know, I'm not the one that wanted that divorce. And he didn't even realize till he had an aha moment. And he said, I'm so sorry I've done that to you because I keep putting that on you. And she said, Dad, thank you for not being defensive for once. And she gave him a gift back, but it started with Dad saying, I'm going to stop saying that. She was like, thank you. Thank you. And now they get to have more of an open conversation. So yeah, first step dads, definitely.
Okay, and then the last question for this part, you touch on the fact that men tend to be fixers, that when women come to them with an issue, they want to immediately jump to telling you what the solution is. What do you say to dads as they're starting this journey to help them kind of tamp down that impulse in themselves?
Well, first of all, just being aware that that is an impulse is, Dad, when you try to quote fix us, it makes us feel like we're a project. We're not a person. We're not your daughter. And if you can just be cognizant of the fact that you give your daughter a gift beyond compare when you listen to her, not fix her, listen to her. And then you could ask her, and I got this from an actual dad of 3 daughters, where he then says, is this a listening session or a fixing session? Let her tell you what she needs. It's going to go a long ways because then you don't have to worry about doing it wrong. But she may say, no, I just need you to listen. Okay, great. But if she says, yeah, I need your input, look at now there's a building of a bridge to her heart. And then you can get it right because she told you what she needs.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Michelle, and we will circle back to the open Q&A. But next, I'm going to introduce Shafia Zaloom. She is a health educator, consultant, and author whose work centers on human development, community building, ethics, and social justice. My goodness. Her approach involves creating opportunities for students and teachers to discuss the complexities of teen culture and decision-making with straightforward, open, and honest dialogue. Shafia has worked with thousands of children and their families in her role as teacher, coach, administrator, board member, and outdoor educator. Shafia is currently the health teacher at the Urban School in San Francisco and develops curricula and trainings for schools across the country. She was honored by the San Francisco Giants Foundation in 2018 for her work with Aim High, a program that expands opportunities for students from low-income neighborhoods and their teachers through tuition-free summer learning enrichment. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, USA Today, NPR, and PBS. She lives in California with her husband and 3 children, and she is here tonight because of Sex Teens and Everything in Between, which is just an amazing, modern, inclusive guide to the sex talk. As the parent of a teenage boy, I appreciated this one so much. So Shafia, I'm excited for you to tell us about it.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And just an appreciation to everyone who's out there being a parent too. I know there are a lot of things you could be doing with your time right now. And so being in yet probably another Zoom meeting or whatever it is definitely an effort. And so I just want to express my appreciation for that. I have 3 kids, 19, 17, and 11. I too am in the thick of it. And sex teens and everything in between. So I've been teaching for about 25 years and started as a social worker, went into teaching for my work to be more preventative than interventive, and started to specialize in healthy sexuality and relationship education probably about 15 years ago. And it was really just more of a logistical thing than anything else. And started to really delve into that topic and specialize. I had the opportunity to write a curriculum guide for documentary film, one in particular called The Hunting Ground, which really focused on sexual assault on college campuses and what was happening there. And that got some media attention, which led to more media attention, that's how that works. And I became the consent lady. That is sort of what people, kids would say when they heard that I was coming. And I started to travel more for work and go to different schools. And when I would go to different schools, I would usually teach kids all day, and then I would do a faculty meeting and I do a parent education evening. And it was really interesting because the students would say to me, and I consult K through college, but my sweet spot's really high school, adolescence. And young people would say to me, Shafia, we understand what the definition is. What does that actually mean? Like, what does that look like on Saturday night for me? And kids, they're concrete thinkers, especially in the adolescent years. They're concrete thinkers. They're moving into that capacity cognitively to, be able to think in abstract ways. And there's this really important process going on called myelination, in which their experiences and how they behave, the choices they make, literally modify their brains because they're establishing patterns of behavior that will, determine in many ways what their behavior will be as adults. That goes for relationships too. So, there was this piece about consent, and the national dialogue was really focusing on consent too. And there was a shift in semantics in the media that we went from no means no to yes means yes. And this was yes means yes legislation that was gaining, attention, discussion, notoriety. And so, that became a part of my curriculum because I like it to keep it relevant. And I noticed that with the culture that was really moving, the pendulum was really swinging in the direction of focusing on and pushing young people towards impersonal sexual activity. So, hookup culture, if you will. And that but they were telling me in their journals that they all longed for authentic connection. They all longed for authentic connection. We all do. It's part of how we thrive as human beings. And so they were having a hard time with that. So started to put together, okay, well, if their brains are going through myelination, they're neuroplastic, and they're establishing patterns of behavior, how can we set them up to have successful relationships later in life if what they feel is being prioritized and if they choose they are participating in this hookup culture, how that can get in the way of those healthy relationships. And so, that was the kid piece. And then the adult piece, teachers and parents alike, I would give my workshop, and then parents would come up to me afterwards, which I always appreciate and want to speak specifically about an issue they were wrestling with their kids. And I would talk to them about it. And then they say, wait a minute, wait a minute. And they take their phone and they would then say, okay, could you say that again and hold it up to my face? And it was sort of like, like Dr. Michelle and Dr. Abby were saying, like, what are the words? Help me with, I need tools for this. Um, what can I put in my toolbox? What should I say? How should I say it? And people really seem to need to want that and to want that. So as I was teaching and traveling around, people said, "Where's your book? How can we carry this over and continue to educate folks on how to do this?" Because when it comes to healthy sexuality education in this country, we are way behind. And a lot of us who are parents are also pioneers because we didn't actually have sex positive, healthy sexuality education and relationship education ourselves. The majority of us, I would say. And so a lot of us haven't had this role modeled for us. And sexuality is a pretty loaded concept in our culture as well. So I found that kids were really, and then with the birth of the internet, and social media and everything else. Like I think Dr. Abby had said, earlier and earlier, kids are exposed to so much more. So they were sort of drowning in information, but starving for wisdom and guidance. And that's why I wrote the book. And what was fascinating was wherever I went, whether I was in Southern California, I was at the school where I teach normally, or I was in Colorado or Boston, or, like wherever I was, kids were asking the same questions about consent and sex. And so I wanted to make sure that I could scale some of that information in a way that was positive. Um, the other thing that I really wanted to do, and I think is super important when we talk to young people, is we can't just say to them, just do this or don't do that. That it's really important for them to understand, well, what gets in the way of that? What would it actually take for me to do that? And what are some tools and things that I could realistically put into practice so that I can overcome some of those obstacles? So, as a sex positive sex educator, I don't believe sex should be stigmatized. I don't believe it should be shamed. And it's really what you do with it that matters. And in addition to that, so much of our culture stigmatizes and shames sexuality that I wanted to provide what kids should aspire to. Because I know this from my own parenting and my own students that when we constantly are saying no, kids check out kids check out and that they'll go to their friends and whomever else. But if we can start to shift the narrative and to say, okay, yes, so here's the world we live in, these are the difficult things, here's the information you need to know to navigate, and this is what we're aspiring to, that actually by putting this in front of you and giving you this knowledge, I am communicating that I believe you can do this, that I can believe you can have a caring, loving relationship. And here are models of what that looks, sounds, and feels like. So not only, be aware of this, and here's how you could navigate these difficult situations, because it is adolescence after all. But this is also what we're going for. And it's real, it's realistic. You can do this. And here's the thing, your brain is developing, right? So practice shapes your brain, or how you behave in your practice shapes your brain shapes your reality. Everything is practice. And you get to choose what you practice, but not the consequences. So be careful what you practice, because you're going to get really good at it. So if you want to have positive, enriching, caring, loving relationships in your life, in your future, it's important to be thinking about how you can start to make choices for yourself that move in that direction. And should you falter, should you make mistakes like we all do, there are ways by which you can communicate, you can show up, you can be vulnerable, you can use medically accurate information from credible resources to live your amends and to aspire to those positive, caring, loving relationships. So in the book, I start with consent because that's fundamental. It protects the fundamentals of human dignity. And it's what makes sexual activity legal in many realms. So talking about consent, a hallmark of my curriculum is that I use scenarios. So real life scenarios that are either transcribed stories that teenagers have told me, or they've written themselves, of teenagers. So it actually is real and relevant. And then, through those scenarios, it's sort of, okay, here's consent. And this is how we take that information and apply it to the complexities of human relationships and interpersonal dynamics. And then I will talk about what are some of the things in our culture and the messages that young people are getting and how they're socialized that might get in the way of practicing consent and going beyond consent. Because frankly, consent is a pretty low bar for a positive, pleasurable sexual experience. So what can get in the way of us moving beyond consent, of consent in particular, but then also moving beyond consent to really explore our own, sexuality with themselves, with other people, which is developmentally appropriate as long as it's on their terms and there is sexual autonomy and agency being practiced. And so then I also talk about what we're aspiring to, which is that it should be a balance of responsibility and pleasure, that there should be joy, and that we are aspiring to caring and loving aspects of a relationship. And then in addition to that, to honor the complexities of the teen years in many ways, sort of all the different decisions that we make that then create situations that we find ourselves in. And then also, should we find ourselves in difficult situations, refusal skills and various things and ways to get out of it. So half of each chapter is narrative and about scenarios. There's about 100 in the book that are particularly written for parents. And then there are resources to educate yourself more if you haven't yourself gotten a comprehensive sex education and want to know what's sort of real and relevant with young people today, currently. And then conversation starters. So concrete language specific to the chapter that will help you engage in conversations with your kid about that specific theme. And then the second half of each chapter is just frequently asked questions that I get all the time when I'm talking to big groups of kids, and I answer them in sound bites as if you raised your hand in my class. So it role models the language you would use to answer. And then it also, that's the way young people digest information these days. And so it's really written for them. And at the same time can, be a quick sex ed 101 on a certain topic for parents. And I had a review crew for the book of about 15, 18 to 21-year-olds who read everything that went into it before it went to the publisher and really gave their input. I wanted to make sure that it would resonate. So that's the book. And I think the one thing that I hope you would take away when it comes to approaching these conversations is that you're actually probably already doing a lot of this work already, because the majority of sex education is actually about family values. And I can talk to kids about ethics all day, but at the end of the day, really, and this is what Dr. Abby and Dr. Michelle are talking about, it's your family values that are going to matter and be the gift of to your child. And it's really just then building this concrete bridge into the context of sexuality that you're doing, because I imagine you're already teaching those important concepts that are fundamental to healthy sexuality, like how we treat each other matters. How to be honest, how to be empathic, all those different things and what that looks like. I can talk about what that looks like across the developmental stages later on, but that's really the gist of the book.
Yeah, so I'm of the generation where I can never remember which movie it was, but it's how I picture our sex education. There was a popular teen movie about when I was a teenager that there was a sex ed scene where the teacher was just like, you have sex and then you get pregnant and then you die. And that is
Mean
certainly
Girls.
not, it is Mean Girls.
Girls,
I always
yeah.
want to say Mean Girls and then I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And that's certainly not actually what exactly happened, but it was kind of what our sex ed looked like. Like, here's all the risks, don't do it. And I knew that wasn't the message I wanted to pass on to my teenager as he became a teenager, but that was my experience. So I didn't really know what else to do, right? But luckily around that time, there was an internet comic strip where they used tea as a metaphor for consent.
Yes.
And so we started there as he entered adolescence. It's like, okay, so we can talk about consent this way. And one of the things you talk about in your book is you use French fries and other non-sexual metaphors to start that consent conversation. And at what age do you think those conversations should start? Because that probably should start before they're teens.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that those conversations start from the time kids can speak and they start interacting with other children. I mean, you're really sort of building the foundation for that, right? So space bubbles, right? That's preschool language in terms of honoring someone's space bubble, narrating for children emotion that you may see on someone else's face when you've had a disagreement or your actions have had an impact on someone else, drawing attention to that, helping them to have an appreciation for other people and how they contribute to their lives, which is sort of the foundation of building empathy across the developmental stages. Also too, bodily autonomy, using the right language for body parts. I mean, there's so much that goes into this that you can start with from a young age. But I think the mantra really is like how we treat each other matters. So let's talk about that and let's expand our emotional vocabulary so that we can identify and express the embodied and emotional experience of the things that we experience in our relationships with other people. So I definitely think from the beginning, this is not one big talk. The sex ed birds and the bees big talk is actually not what how I encourage people to approach this. This is collecting moments. This is about the value of small victories, scaffolding this over time, thinking in terms of layers. And, it really is that inserting those values here and there when you're watching television with your children. I think media is a fabulous way to actually have these discussions about relationships. Not only do they then learn how to be a critic and a filter versus a sponge when it comes to media, but to engage in dialogue about people in a way that doesn't feel so intense and intimate. And so you could say things like, well, how do you think that person treated them? Or I couldn't quite tell how they were feeling after that interaction. Did you pick up on it? Just to ask those questions. You want to avoid why, because why, actually, their radar for judgment is so keen. And when you ask why, you've already made a judgment. So lead with what, how, how do you think they were feeling? What do you think it would take for this to happen? Things like that. You can comment with, I notice, which is also non-judgmental. You're sharing your observations. And start to discuss media and just become the askable parent. And so that you're normalizing these conversations over time. So as your kid develops and their need for different levels of conversation develop, you're following them along the way. And so, and here's the thing, as a sex educator, it would be irresponsible for me to create situations in class where kids felt like they had to have some sort of experiential context to participate in a meaningful way. So the scenarios, we watch media together, but the non-sexual metaphor is something that I include so that at different points, all kids, all people can, find something within themselves that they can relate to when I'm talking about, the context of sexuality in a different way. So French fries, the majority of people like French fries. I do French fries with teachers, I do it with adults. So, when you have your favorite fries and you can get all drama and, play that up, Chick-fil-A fries with special sauce, shoestring fries, whatever your sides are, you have a plate and you go to sit down at your family table or a table of friends, what happens? Hands dart in and pick off your fries. And I'll ask a room of folks, like, how many of you are actually okay with that? Very rarely will someone raise their hand. And if they do, it's context dependent, like, oh, it's my best friend, or we've been sharing fries forever. I know they're going to give me some of their shake. But most of the time, and then people will say, well, so how come, what's wrong with it? They didn't ask. It's not like they showed that they cared because they're your fries. They belong to you, right? And then, well, so what gets in the way? I don't want to be judged. I've been taught to share conflicting values. Don't want to introduce any contention. Okay. And so what else belongs to you when it comes to sexual consent? Not to minimize sexual consent with French fries, but what else belongs to you? Your body. You get to choose how you touch and get touched because your body belongs to you. And so sometimes that's needed for kids who are concrete thinkers who may not have experiential context to understand concepts that we're talking about when it comes to sexuality. Because it's really important that children understand what an individual sense of readiness is. And be able to pace themselves and make decisions that honor where they are developmentally, what's appropriate for them in their relationships, and how they want to move forward.
All right. Thank you very much, Sophia. So attendees, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. If you can't find Q&A, I am monitoring both. I just want to say one of the things I loved about this, and I probably should have expected it, but I didn't, is that the theme that tied all your books together was having conversations with your children. And for some reason, I just didn't go in expecting that really all of your books are about like taking a step back as the parent and realizing your child is an individual and it's your job to be there to support who they are as individuals. And as a parent, that's just overwhelming, right? The support for that kind of intentional parenting, because there's so much helicopter and snowplow parenting and all of these things today where parental pressure sort of feels like you're supposed to lead your kids' lives for them. And that's never been the kind of mom I wanted to be. So seeing all these books where it emphasizes the importance of like taking that step back and letting your kids have the conversation with you Like, you make sure that the things that need to be talked about get talked about, but you let your children guide how that goes based on their comfort level and how they're feeling and where they're at, has just been incredible. One of the things I love best about this new monthly parenting panel we have launched is that I feel like I'm going to be a really prepared parent by the time we go back to in-person events. I'm reading a lot of parenting books right now, but I need it. I need that aid in different areas that I don't know that I need until I see it, and to feel that support that I'm on the right path. Um, and then this kind of bonding with the parents in our community also through these kinds of events. So thank you all so much. I know this is a hard time to be launching books too, because this is not what our book events normally look like, but I am really grateful to have them. Um, So the first question, okay, there we are, is COVID related, isn't it always? Um, how has the era of COVID and everything that's going on with that impacted the subject of your individual books?
Shall I jump in?
Yes.
Because that's a no-brainer. When the world feels like a scary place, oh, there's a pandemic. So actually, my book went to press in April, and the publisher said, could you add a conversation? So one of the things I didn't say when I spoke was, like both your books, the bulk of the book is conversations. So it's two types of conversations. What I call a red light conversation, which is a conversation that happens just like that because you're blown away by stuff that happens. And in the COVID example, we know that people are really worried. There's so many things to worry about now, just with the pandemic, never mind the elections and racial justice issues and all the other stuff that's going on. And your child comes in, your 9-year-old comes into the house crying because their neighbor's grandma's in the hospital. And so your stomach drops because you didn't want to have that conversation. You wanted to keep COVID away, and yet things come right in and your child says, is our grandma going to be okay? And what's going to happen? And again, you want to say, yes, she's fine. She's safe. Don't worry. You have nothing to worry about. That's the red light conversation. Before you have an opportunity to take a breath and realize that this is a conversation that you need to sit down and you need to be able to listen to what she's telling you. And I think the issue with COVID is that it brings everything into starker, harsher relief. For a start, we're talking about parents today. So many parents in this country and around the world, for that matter, are now expected to not just be parents and not just be workers, but also to be teachers, and all three at the same time. Thank you very much. At home, distance learning, whatever it is, the intensity of life under COVID has heightened all our emotions and all our tensions and all our frustrations and all our stress. And so it's in this particular time where it's more important than ever to be aware of the fact that red light conversations can happen, but it's harder than ever to take space because we're under so much water all the time. And so I think one of the sort of most important things I would say for parents in COVID era is, and I wish I'd written this, I'm going to put this in the next edition of the book. You've got to have compassion on yourself. You've got to be able to forgive yourself. If we can't forgive ourselves, we are going to have a very hard time teaching our children forgiveness. And now is the time to give yourself some slack. Now is the time to recognize that it's incredibly stressful and things don't happen the way you had planned. Things don't happen the way your child had planned. It's a tough time. So those are some COVID thoughts.
Okay, so my COVID thoughts, I guess, would be that so many dads and moms are now working from home. And so a lot of dads, if they can think strategically and say, this is the time that I am at home more, why not use this time to increase conversations with your kids? And if you don't know what to say, I think even this idea of gathering around the dinner table, let's bring it back. I think there was so much more before pulling parents away from being at home, right? Now there aren't as many, especially I live in Oregon. We're still not very open. And so now there aren't as many, games happening or practices happening. So as long as you're at home, why not this just kind of change your mindset, dad, and say, well, what if I initiated these dad-daughter dates? Some daughters think that's a really lame term. I don't want to date my dad. That's gross. Well, call it dad-daughter time, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. But say, what if you did have your one-on-one time to have a conversation around a theme? Give your daughter the book, let her choose the theme so she has choice and voice, and make it a time where you do a fun dad-daughter time in the backyard. Get creative, do it in the garage, set it up, have a dad-daughter time, go get her Jamba, bring it home. Make it something on her terms where you can have a conversation, because there's conversations here on anxiety, depression, suicide. I mean, we know the rates have gone up of suicide because of COVID. And I think sometimes maybe even mom and dad, and especially dad, you might not even know things you're facing, but they're right under the surface. But if you can have a conversation with your daughter on her anxiety, it may help you actually get more in touch with your own. And then admit to your daughter, you know what, I've actually felt a little more anxious than I've realized, and I'm eating more because of it. I know, me too, dad. I mean, look at the bond that can happen over being honest about what you're actually feeling and experiencing in the season, that is going to actually strengthen. So you'll look back at this COVID time and say, we actually got closer instead of further apart. And that's what I really am hopeful, that I think all of our books are going to help with increasing bonding with your kids by talking and listening during this COVID season.
So my COVID thoughts would be there's actually quite a few issues that have reared their heads more than usual with this context of COVID. And one of those things is body image. So a lot of adolescents tend to be on social media a whole lot more than they would be. And it's been for a pretty long time. And so it's very different when you're when you're comparing your insides to someone's outsides through social media, and you're seeing how people are curating themselves through filters and things like that, and then have more time at home in which you may be focused on your appearance. This tends to be gendered to a certain extent too. For boys, I find it's a little easier because it's like, they're connecting in video game fun rooms and party rooms and chat rooms and things like that, and they're connecting more, and it's like, oh, more of that, that's great. But for a lot of young women, I'm hearing about them wanting to just discuss body image and to talk about it more and to have perspective, and to be reminded of the fact that, people are curating themselves and how they present themselves online versus what's really going on. The other piece is pandemic pornography. So pornography is a really important concept issue to address. I have in a whole chapter sort of how to talk about porn, what porn is like these days, how sort of our culture has pornified a lot of mainstream culture when it comes to representations of sexuality, and that porn has also become the default sex education for this country. And that's like watching the Fast and the Furious to learn how to drive. So I think, and Pornhub, which tends to be, if kids are watching porn, the type of pornography they're watching, gave premium to everyone for a month's free because of COVID. By May of last spring, there were 17,000, yeah, searches for COVID and pandemic porn already. So there is a lot that's out there and circulating. There's a ton of TikTok, where there are sexualized images, kids are expressing sexuality or teen sexual thirst, things like that, that require, really non-judgmental, open conversation that really explores with your kid, where you become that askable parent, like everyone's sort of talking about tonight in terms of how we do that, and let them be experts in their own experience. I think that's huge and builds a ton of credibility. Where you're asking them, help me understand the awesomeness of this social media. What is it, and how does that make you feel? And are there other places in which you have those experiences outside of a digital context? Those sorts of things. There's also more media to watch. And again, that's a really great way to have these discussions. And like we've been talking about, COVID has made family dynamics and relationship dynamics, put them under a microscope. And so there's actually a lot of ways you can, how do we figure out how to live with each other in this space that can sometimes feel tight, and where we may be, in each other's space a little more than we want to be. Opportunities to practice consent, to talk about consent, how we communicate around what our needs are and what our limits are, and how we work productively in those conversations to come to compromise, to understand each other, to be empathic in how we approach it so that we connect versus drive disconnection. Those would be my thoughts so far.
Excellent. Okay, and I know we're running a little over already, so just one more last quick question about generational differences. That you have all written very modern, forward-thinking parenting books, and I can personally attest to that they are incredibly useful in and of themselves and are great at encompassing the topics that they cover. But for parents today, we were raised by a different generation, so we haven't seen a lot of what you guys are advising modeled. And what do you suggest for parents that are having trouble, that like the idea, but are having trouble not having had practice in those scenarios? And I know, Abby, you talk a lot about talking to your spouse about what each of your strengths are, but is role playing with an adult partner a good idea for practicing those skills so that you don't screw up that important conversation with your kid? Or what do you guys suggest for that?
So Michelle, you want to go first? Because I saw you also talk there. Okay. I love role play. I do role play in the programs that we use in our research on parenting. We use role play because it's the best way to change people's behavior, to practice, right? If we don't practice, we can't expect to change anything. The thing is, people are very self-conscious about role play. So in the book, I don't say to people role play, but by providing different scenarios, conversations, red light conversations and green light conversations, people have the opportunity, and I think, so Michelle, it sounds like it's very similar in your book, people have the opportunity to try out, right? To try out, to read and to see what resonates and to see what, oh, I did that the other day. And yeah, oh yeah, there's an idea. So there's sort of mental ways to practice the conversations that are in the book. But I also, as you pointed out, suggest that parents talk through, so values, experiences, what's our plan? Okay, what are we going to tell our 9-year-old about COVID-19, or about the fact that I'm a doctor, an ER doctor in the hospital, and there's very significant risk here, or that, mom is working as an essential worker, or whatever it is. I live in Minneapolis. Sadly, this summer we saw the death of George Floyd, and then protests and riots, and there were helicopters sort of circling right by our neighborhood. We were just a mile and a half away. And we had a lot of conversations. My youngest just turned 18, but my neighbors have 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds. And how do we think about these things? And so the parents actually had conversations among themselves about how are you going to talk to your 6-year-old? How am I going? So there are many ways to practice. One can be with your partner. One can be with your friends, with your neighbors, to sort of, because I really think your point, Anna, is very important. We've never talked about social media bullying before. We didn't have to a generation ago. We didn't have to talk about lockdown drills a generation ago. We didn't have to talk about climate change or about fake news, or, distinguishing, fact from hearsay, or a pandemic. We just didn't have to talk about those things before. The last thing I'll say is, I encourage parents to it's not exactly role playing, but when you have kids who are shy or are reticent to talk, parents can model conversations between themselves, right? You have an awkward 15-year-old boy, and you want to talk about big emotions as a result of whatever it is. Mom and dad talk to each other. You're having dinner together. Family dinners sounds like we all think that family dinners are an amazing thing to do. It's a fantastic opportunity for conversation. And there he is. He's there. He's stuck. He's captive. And he's watching mom and dad have a conversation modeling exactly the kind of essential conversation that, and there's no pressure. It's not like mom is saying, kids hate mind reading. Mom goes, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Yeah. Kids hate that, which is, by the way, why I suggest that you have your essential conversations with your more reticent kids and your teens in the car, where you don't have to look at each other, or walking the dog, where you're parallel side by side. You don't need to have eye contact. So yeah, I think it's tough, but I think there are ways to engage with other people to get practice.
Well, the thing I would say is that, when we were all young, we all had a teacher, a mentor, a tutor, a coach. And the older we get, sometimes we assume that we need to have all the answers or know how to do everything. Where'd we get that? So I think if we can all as adults come as learners, and I know that all three of us are championing parents. And so we're not saying we've got it all right, but we've all been seasoned in our areas of work. And we're doing the best we can to provide you as parents with a script so that you don't have to have it all together in knowing how to have a conversation or open it up. And I have found, at least in my work with dads and daughters, a lot of daughters find it really endearing that their dads would come with humility to go, I don't even know what to say. And you open up the book that we're all giving you, and you have a place to start the conversation. All of us are saying, here, bring the books that we've given you and open it up and start the conversation. And you don't have to know what to say or how to say it, but we want to be like a coach right there with you. Picture us as, right on your shoulder going, maybe if you said it this way, they'll respond a little different, because we want to cheer you on as parents. And we would say, start with our books.
I would echo everything that Dr. Abby and Dr. Michelle have said, certainly. Here's the thing, I think it's actually a gift. It is a huge gift. One of there's consent, and then there's cultivating the capacity to practice consent. Those are two different things. And so one of the cultural messages that I think is really toxic that intersects with that is this effortless perfection. And I think we have to resist ourselves as adults this cultural message that somehow there's this way by which we all need to effortlessly be perfect. And one of those things that is essential to authentic connection in relationships is healthy vulnerability, and the ability to say, I don't know, I need help, let's do this together. And so I think it's actually a gift, because we all know that the most effective parenting is actually modeling what we're hoping to teach. And so in that moment, you can say, you know what, this is really hard for me too. And I didn't get any practice in this. I haven't had this role modeled for me either, but I know what you're, wrestling with today. I've just been to this talk, and, my eyes were open. And so as your parent, I want to do right by you, and I want to be responsible as a parent. And so I'm hoping we can figure this out together, because sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones to have. And we all know that in sustainable relationships, that's true. And so if you can role model that for your kid, I think that is the greatest gift. And they may run away. My own child, when I trap them in the car, they always make fun of how I trap them in the car. And I have a kid who literally go, ah, and I can outweight them. And then, we'll have our conversation, our small little tidbit. But in those moments, you can say to them too, look, I know this is hard. And it's sort of like how you made them feel there was democracy in your house when they were younger, where you said, okay, you can choose out of these three things. but you chose the 3 things they were choosing from. It's kind of the same thing where you can say, "Look, I know this is hard and this is difficult. It is for me too. And we need to do this. And some of these issues can wait. I'll wait for you, if this is not, but this is essential. And I really think we need to at least touch on it. There's some information and some things I'd like you to know." And so we can do this in the car, we can do this on a walk, we can do this after dinner when we're unloading, loading the dishwasher. You can choose that, but it's got to happen. I mean, my sister-in-law had this conversation between the crack in the door of the bathroom. Like one of her kids was on the other side and she was on the other, whatever it takes. And I think that in those moments, it's so beautiful because we can actually be human to our kids, and show them that humanity. Because when it comes to sexuality these days, we've got to humanize it because the culture is really pushing them to disconnect, to objectify, to dehumanize. And authentic connection is really what we all need and long for when it comes to our well-being and health. And so if we can get there together, I think that it's actually an opportunity. It doesn't have to be, some sort of detriment.
Right. Thank you all so much. I'm so glad we actually ended on like a super positive note there. That was the perfect wrapping this up. So thank you, panelists, so much for joining us this evening, Dr. Abby, Dr. Michelle, and Shafia. We are so grateful that you guys made time in your schedules for one more Zoom call. I know Zoom fatigue is real for you guys in a way it's probably not real for me. I've only got one event a day maximum, but we're so grateful you guys joined us. And attendees, all of their books are currently available in store for in-store or curbside pickup if you're local, or for us to ship out first thing tomorrow morning if you are not. And there is the link you used to register for the event also has the link that leads to the page with all those books to order through our website. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. For those attendees that may be interested, next month's parenting panel will be November 12th. And its theme is dialing down the parenting stress as we're getting ready to go into the holiday season. So we hope you guys will join us for that one also. So thank you, everybody, and y'all all have a good night.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks,
you.
everyone. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you.